The alarm went off at 4:47 in the morning. Not because it was set for that time, but because Ella Chen had been awake since 3 a.m., lying in the dark, staring at the ceiling, her heart already running ahead of her body. Today was the day. 5 years of everything, every late night, every skipped birthday, every quiet sacrifice, had been building to this single morning. She reached over and silenced the alarm before it could finish its first ring. She sat up slowly. The room was still dark except for the thin sliver of streetlight that crept through the gap in her curtains. She looked at the exam slip on her desk. She'd placed it there the night before, so it would be the first thing she saw. She picked it up. Read it again. As if the words might have changed overnight. They hadn't. Qualification examination. 8 a.m. Hall C, 3rd floor. She pressed it to her chest for a moment, closed her eyes, and breathed. Then everything went wrong. Because 47 minutes later, on a quiet stretch of road 2 kilometers from the examination center, Ella heard the sound that would split her life into 2 halves, the life before that moment, and the life after it. A crash. Loud, sharp, final. Like the world itself had cracked open. She stopped walking. And what she saw on the side of that road, what she saw lying in the gray morning fog, was a man who was not moving. A man whose white shirt was slowly turning red. A man whose hand was stretched out on the cold asphalt as if reaching for something no one else could see. Her phone buzzed. She looked down. Final call, qualification exam starts in 20 minutes. Please proceed to Hall C immediately. She looked up. She looked down again. And in that single suspended second, that one heartbeat between the life she had planned and the one she hadn't, Ella Chen made a decision that would undo her, destroy her, rebuild her, and ultimately reveal something about herself that 5 years of studying never could. This is her story. And before we dive any deeper into it, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click that subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because stories like this one, we bring them to you every single week. Now let's get back to Ella. She had grown up in a small apartment on the east side of the city, the kind of neighborhood where the buildings were old and the walls were thin and you could hear your neighbors' arguments as clearly as if they were sitting in your own kitchen. Her mother, Grace, had worked 2 jobs for most of Ella's childhood, a morning shift at a dry cleaning business and an evening shift at a hospital cafeteria. Not because she wanted to. Because she had to. Ella's father had left when she was 9. Not dramatically. Not with a scene. He had simply stopped coming home one evening, and then the days had stretched into weeks, and eventually Grace had stopped setting a place for him at the table. Neither of them spoke about it much. There was an unspoken agreement between mother and daughter that survival required a certain kind of forward momentum, and looking backward too long was a luxury they couldn't afford. So Ella moved forward. She was the kind of student that teachers remembered years after she'd left their class, not because she was the loudest or the most naturally gifted, but because of a quiet, almost stubborn intensity she brought to everything. She stayed late. She asked questions that made teachers pause and think. She filled notebooks with color-coded notes that she would reread on the bus, at the dinner table, in the 10 minutes before she fell asleep. When she was 16, she told her mother she was going to become a certified financial analyst. Grace had looked up from the sink where she was washing dishes, her hands still wet, and said nothing for a moment. Then she dried her hands slowly on a dish towel and looked at her daughter with those tired, beautiful eyes that had seen too much and still somehow believed in more. Then that's what you'll be, her mother had said. That was all. No ceremony. No fanfare. Just a quiet, unshakable transfer of faith from one generation to the next. But the path was longer and harder than either of them had imagined. The certification process required passing a series of brutal examinations, each level harder than the last, each demanding hundreds of hours of preparation. Ella passed the first 2 levels on her first attempts, which was rare enough to be remarkable. But the 3rd level, the final qualification examination, was something else entirely. It was notoriously difficult, with a global pass rate that hovered below 40%. Candidates who failed had to wait a full year before they could attempt it again. Careers were built or buried on this single exam. Ella had failed it once before, 2 years ago, by a margin that still made her stomach turn when she thought about it. 7 marks. 7. She had gone home that evening, sat at the kitchen table, and cried in a way she hadn't cried since her father left. Not because she was weak, but because she had given everything she had and it hadn't been enough, and sometimes the body needed to acknowledge that before the mind could move past it. Grace had sat beside her and said nothing. Just placed her hand over Ella's on the table. After a long time, Ella had looked up, wiped her face, and said, "I'm going to pass it next year." And Grace had nodded. "I know you will." The year that followed was unlike anything Ella had ever put herself through. She restructured her entire life around the exam. She worked part-time at an accounting firm during the day, studying on her lunch breaks and in the hour before her shift started. She studied in the evenings from 7 until midnight, 5 days a week. On weekends, she attended a study group she'd organized herself, gathering 4 other candidates in the public library's meeting room every Saturday morning, quizzing each other mercilessly on concepts they all quietly feared. She turned down invitations. She stopped watching the shows she used to love. She skipped her best friend Maya's birthday dinner, something that cost her something real, because it fell on the same night as a mock exam she had scheduled for herself. Maya had called her afterwards, not angry but worried. "Ella, you can't do this to yourself." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're disappearing." "I'm preparing." There's a difference between preparing and punishing yourself. Ella had been quiet for a moment. Then she'd said, "I failed it, Maya. I failed it by 7 marks. 7. I can't let that happen again. I won't." Maya had sighed. "Just don't forget that you're a person, okay? Not just a candidate." Ella had said she understood. But the truth was, in those months of preparation, the line between Ella the person and Ella the candidate had blurred almost completely. Her dreams were about financial models. She woke up thinking about derivatives. She ate dinner while rereading her notes. And it was working. Her mock exam scores climbed steadily throughout the year. By the time the registration window for the qualification exam opened, she was scoring in the top 12% of candidates globally on practice tests. Her study group noticed. The firm she worked for noticed. Even Grace noticed, and the way her mother looked at her sometimes across the dinner table, something shifting in her expression. Something that looked almost like awe. The exam was scheduled for the 3rd Tuesday of the month. Ella had known the date for 6 months. She had been counting down without meaning to, the number shrinking in the back of her mind like a clock nobody had asked to be installed there. The night before the exam, she had done everything right. She'd reviewed her notes for the last time, not obsessively, just a quiet, confident pass-through, like a musician running through a piece they've long since mastered. She'd prepared her outfit, laid it on the chair in the corner of her room. She'd packed her bag with everything she needed: exam slip, identification, pencils, calculator, water. She'd eaten a proper dinner. Grace had made her favorite, a slow-cooked chicken with rice and vegetables, and they had sat together at the table and talked about small things, ordinary things, the way families do on the evenings before something important, as if the ordinary can anchor you against what's coming. Grace had hugged her at the door of her bedroom. "Get some rest." "I will." "You're ready, Ella." "I know." And she had been. She truly had been ready. 5 years, 2 attempts, 1 narrow failure, 360-something days of rebuilding, all of it had been pointing toward that morning. She had set her alarm for 4:47, planned to leave the apartment by 5:30, planned to arrive at the examination center by 6:15, well before the 7:30 candidate registration deadline, well before the 8 o'clock start. She had built in buffers. She had thought of everything. She had not thought of the crash. The morning had started beautifully, actually. The city was still asleep. The streets were quiet in that rare, particular way they only are in the hour before most of the world wakes up, a calm that belongs to night shift workers, early joggers, and people carrying something important. The fog was light and low, drifting between the buildings like it was taking its time. Ella had her bag on her shoulder, her exam slip in her jacket pocket, her mind quiet and clear and focused. She was walking because she'd always preferred it on days like this. The movement helped her think, helped her settle. The examination center was close enough to walk in fair weather, and the morning was mild. She had her earphones in, listening to a soft instrumental playlist she'd built specifically for this kind of morning. Everything felt aligned. She was 2 kilometers from the center when she heard it. The sound came from around a bend in the road, a sharp, shattering impact, the kind that is unmistakable. Not a fender bender. Not a near miss. Something real. Something bad. She pulled out her earphones instinctively, and in the sudden silence she heard it again, a secondary sound, lower, the groan of metal coming to rest. She turned the corner. There were 2 vehicles. One was a motorbike, lying on its side near the curb, the front wheel still spinning slowly. The other was a car that had clearly run through a red light and caught the motorbike mid-intersection. The car's front bumper was crumpled, the driver's side door open, the driver standing a short distance away, talking rapidly into a phone. And on the road, between the 2 vehicles, was a man. He was lying on his back. His helmet had come off and was resting several feet away. His jacket was torn at the shoulder. There was blood, not a little, spreading dark and fast from somewhere beneath him, catching the pale morning light in a way that made Ella's stomach drop hard. He wasn't moving. 3 other people were in the area, a man who'd been walking a dog, a woman who'd stepped out of a nearby building, and a young couple, and all of them were doing the same thing. Standing. Looking. Frozen in that particular helplessness that seizes people at accidents, the mind and body both waiting for someone else to step forward first. Nobody was stepping forward. Ella's phone buzzed. She looked at it. Final call, qualification exam starts in 20 minutes. Please proceed to Hall C immediately. She looked at the man on the ground. She looked at the phone. Someone's already called for help, a voice in her head said. Reasonable. Calm. The driver is on his phone. An ambulance is coming. There's nothing you specifically need to do. You've worked 5 years for this. Your mother is counting on you. You are 2 kilometers away. If you leave right now, you can still make it. She took a step toward the examination center. She stopped. Because she could see, even from where she was standing, that his chest was moving wrong. Stuttering. Uneven. The blood was spreading too fast. And none of the people standing around him had moved closer. Nobody was kneeling beside him. Nobody was holding his hand or checking his airway or pressing anything to the wound or talking to him. He was just lying there, alone in the middle of a road, bleeding, and no one, not one person, was with him. She thought about something her mother had said to her once, years ago, when Ella was maybe 12. They had passed a woman sitting on a bus stop bench, clearly in distress, crying, shaking, alone. Ella had wanted to stop. Grace had been tired, in a hurry, and had gently guided her onward. But half a block later, Grace had stopped herself. She'd turned around. She'd gone back. She'd sat with the woman for 20 minutes while Ella stood nearby, watching. Afterwards, Ella had asked her mother why she went back. Grace had thought about it for a moment. Then she'd said, because I could see her. And if I can see someone's pain and I choose to walk away from it, then I've decided that my comfort is worth more than their suffering. And I don't want to be that person, Ella. I don't want you to be that person either. Ella had never forgotten it. And standing on that road, with her exam in 20 minutes and a stranger bleeding on the asphalt, the words came back to her as clearly as if her mother were standing right beside her. She ran to him. Hey, she said, dropping to her knees beside him, her bag hitting the ground. Hey, can you hear me? Nothing. She pressed 2 fingers to his neck. Pulse so weak but there. She looked at the wound. His right side, below the ribs. The jacket was shredded there. She didn't know exactly what the injury was, but she knew what bleeding that fast meant. "Has anyone called an ambulance?" she called out, not looking up. "I did," the car driver said from a distance, voice shaking. "They're coming." "How long?" They said 8 minutes. 8 minutes. She pulled off her own jacket without thinking and pressed it firmly against the wound. He groaned. A low sound, barely conscious. "Stay with me," she said. "I've got you. Stay with me." His eyes opened. Not fully. Just a sliver. Unfocused, glassy, but open. "You're going to be okay," she said, and she meant it with everything she had, the way you mean things when you have no choice but to mean them. "An ambulance is coming. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." His lips moved. No sound came out. "Don't try to talk. Just breathe. Slowly. Look at me." The glassy eyes found her face. "There," she said. "Good. Just look at me. I'm right here." Her phone buzzed again. She ignored it. She stayed on her knees on that road for 11 minutes, not 8, 11, because the ambulance was 3 minutes late, talking to him in a low, steady voice, maintaining pressure on the wound, watching his chest rise and fall. The world around her had shifted into a kind of hyperreal slowness. The distant sound of the city waking up. The spinning wheel of the motorbike finally stopping. The other bystanders watching her now, not the injured man. When the ambulance came, the paramedics moved quickly and precisely. One of them looked at Ella as he knelt beside the man. "You did this?" he asked, indicating the jacket held to the wound. "Yes." He nodded. "Good call. He'd have lost a lot more blood." They worked fast. A stretcher. Equipment. Voices using words she didn't fully understand. The man, still barely conscious, was lifted, secured, moved. One of the paramedics paused at the ambulance doors and looked at Ella. "Are you family? Do you want to ride with him?" She looked at her watch. 8:09. The exam had started 9 minutes ago. The doors closed. She stood alone on the road, her jacket gone, her knees dirty, her hands trembling slightly, and the morning fog still drifting around her as if nothing had happened at all. She was already too late. She arrived at the examination center at 8:23. She knew before she got there. She knew it the way you know things that you've already accepted even though part of you is still hoping otherwise. The doors to Hall C were closed. A security officer stood outside. She showed him her exam slip anyway. "I'm sorry," he said. Candidates were locked in at 8:05. No exceptions. "I know," she said. She stopped. What was she going to say? "I just wanted to try." He looked at her, hands, knees, the absence of a jacket. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she said. She turned and walked back down the hallway. She found a bench near the building's entrance and sat down on it and did not move for a very long time. If you're still watching up to this point, type "I'm still here" in the comments. Because what happens next is where this story truly begins. She sat on that bench for 45 minutes. She didn't call anyone. She didn't check her phone. She just sat, hands folded in her lap, looking at nothing in particular, while the building moved around her, candidates going in, staff walking through, a cleaner mopping the corridor floor in long, rhythmic strokes. At some point she became aware that she was cold. She'd given away her jacket. She wrapped her arms around herself in that simple physical gesture, arms around her own body, holding herself together, finally broke something loose inside her chest. She didn't cry loudly. That wasn't her way. She cried the way she did most hard things, quietly, precisely, without excess. Tears down her face, jaw tight, breathing measured. Grieving without losing control of the grief. A woman in her 50s, walking past with a folder under her arm, slowed down and looked at her. Not intrusively. Just with the particular attention of someone who had seen enough of life to recognize genuine pain when they encountered it. The woman sat down beside her. "Do you want me to leave?" the woman asked. "No," Ella said. She wasn't sure why she said it. She usually did want people to leave when she was like this. But something about the woman's directness, not asking if she was okay, not offering platitudes, just asking if her presence was wanted, made Ella want her to stay. "What happened?" the woman asked. And Ella told her. All of it. The man on the road. The blood. The jacket. The 11 minutes. The 8:09 on her watch. The closed doors. The woman listened without interrupting. When Ella finished, the silence between them lasted long enough to feel intentional. "What will you do now?" the woman asked. "Wait a year," Ella said. "Take it again." The woman steadied her face. "You're not angry." "I am," Ella said. "I am angry. But I also know I couldn't have done anything differently. That's a hard thing to hold at the same time." "Yes." The woman stood up. She reached into her folder and pulled out a small white card. She set it on the bench beside Ella without explanation, without ceremony. Then she walked away down the corridor and was gone before Ella thought to look at the card. It said, Dr. Patricia Osei, Director of Professional Development. And a phone number. Ella put it in her pocket and forgot about it. She took the bus home. She sat in the back, pressed against the window, watching the city move past, people going about their mornings with the particular purposefulness of people who didn't know that elsewhere, someone's 5 years had just quietly collapsed. She found that she couldn't be resentful of them for it. They were just living. Just doing what people do when they don't know that someone near them is hurting. Grace was at work when she got home. Ella sent a text, "Missed the exam. I'm okay. Tell you everything later." 3 dots appeared immediately, despite the fact that Grace was supposed to be at work and wasn't supposed to have her phone. Then. "Come home. I'll leave early. Don't leave early. I'm okay." A pause. Then, "Are you sure?" "Yes." Another pause. Then, "I love you." "I love you too." Ella went to her room, sat on her bed, and looked at her desk, the notes, the color-coded folders, the practice papers, the carefully ordered landscape of a year's worth of effort. She looked at it for a long time. Then she got up, went to the kitchen, made herself tea, and sat at the table and thought. Not about what she'd lost. She already knew what she'd lost. She thought about the man on the road. She thought about his chest moving wrong. She thought about the 11 minutes she'd knelt beside him, talking, pressing, holding. She thought about the paramedic saying good call. She thought about whether he was alive right now. She didn't know his name. She didn't know anything about him except the specific weight of his life in those 11 minutes, the way it had felt like a responsibility she hadn't chosen but also somehow couldn't put down. She decided she didn't regret it. That didn't make it hurt less. But the two things could coexist, she realized. The pain and the clarity. The grief and the certainty. She had done what she believed was right, and right had cost her, and she was going to carry the cost. That was how it worked. What she hadn't expected was the reaction from other people. When word got around, through her study group, through colleagues at the firm, eventually through a brief mention in a local community forum that somebody had posted about a young woman who stopped to help a motorbike accident victim and missed her qualification exam, the response split almost perfectly down the middle. Half the people who reached out said some version of the same thing: "You did the right thing. You're a good person. The exam will come around again." Kind words. Genuine, mostly. But delivered in the tone of people who were glad the choice had been hers and not theirs. The other half, and this was the part that surprised her, were less gentle. A colleague at the firm, a man named Derek who Ella had always found pleasant enough, stopped her in the break room one morning and said, "I heard what happened. Look, I'm not saying you shouldn't have helped the guy. Obviously you should have. But you could have called an ambulance and kept walking. You didn't have to stay. Ella looked at him. He was alone, she said. There were other people there. They weren't doing anything. Derek shrugged with the particular comfort of someone who had never had to make that choice. Still, 1 year's delay. That's real consequences. I know, she said. I was there. Maya was better than Derek, kinder, more careful, but even she had a moment, about 2 weeks after the exam, where she said something that hit harder than she'd intended. They were having coffee. Maya had been listening to Ella talk through everything, the grief, the financial strain, the waiting, and at a certain point Maya had sighed and said, I think sometimes your compassion gets in the way of your sense of self-preservation, Ella. Like, I love that about you. But also it worries me. Ella had been quiet for a moment. Then she'd said, if I'd walked past him and he'd died, and then I'd gone in and passed that exam, do you think I could have lived with it? Maya hadn't answered. Because I'd been thinking about this, Ella continued, her voice careful and measured. And the answer is no. Maybe I could have performed fine on the exam that day and never known the outcome and been fine. But I knew. I was right there. I saw him. And if he had died because I walked past him to go take an exam, then I think some part of me would have failed something much more important than a qualification test. And I don't think I'd have been able to explain that to myself. Maya looked at her for a long time. You're a better person than me, she finally said. I'm not, Ella said. I just made the only choice I could live with. The months that followed were difficult in ways that were less dramatic but no less real than the morning of the exam. There was the financial strain. She had been counting on passing the exam to qualify for a position at a larger firm, one that paid significantly more. That opportunity evaporated. She stayed at her current firm, which was fine but limited, and watched 2 colleagues who had passed their exams move upward while she remained level. There was the exhaustion of starting the preparation cycle again, not from scratch, but from a place of recent failure, which in some ways was harder. The notes on her desk gathered a faint layer of dust for the first 2 months. She couldn't make herself sit down with them. Not yet. The wound was still too fresh. There was her mother, who never said anything reproachful, not once, not even in the small ways that people sometimes say things without quite saying them. But Ella knew what it meant for Grace, this delay. She knew how carefully her mother had been budgeting, how much she had been hoping for the improved income that would follow the qualification. The weight of that knowledge sat in Ella's chest like a stone that had decided to stay. She started running in the mornings. Not because she'd been a runner before, but because she needed something physical to match the mental weight she was carrying. She ran early, before the city fully woke, in the same hours she used to spend studying. Sometimes, on her route, she passed the intersection where the accident had happened. She always slowed down there. She didn't know why. Maybe because it felt like a place that deserved to be noticed. A place where something had changed. She never found out what had happened to the man. She had asked at the hospital the day after the accident, but without a name or a patient number, the staff couldn't tell her anything. She tried searching online, the community forum post, local news, but found nothing conclusive. He had been taken away in an ambulance and had simply ceased to exist in her life, the way strangers do. Present for a moment, intensely, and then gone. She thought about him sometimes. Not obsessively. Just the way you think about moments that were pivotal, the way you carry them without quite meaning to, like a stone in your pocket that you keep forgetting is there until your hand closes around it unexpectedly. 4 months after the exam, she picked up her notes again. She didn't make a ceremony of it. She just sat down one evening, opened the top folder, and started reading. As if no time had passed. As if the grief had not been real. As if she were simply a person who studied, continuing to study, because that was what she did. It felt different this time. Not easier, harder, in some ways. But different. There was a quality to her focus now that hadn't been there before. Something steadier. Less desperate. as if the loss had stripped away the performance of preparation and left only the substance of it. Her study group reconvened. They were smaller now. 2 of the original 5 had passed and moved on, but they met every Saturday as they always had, and being in that room with people who understood what it meant to fight for something difficult felt, on the worst days, like the only thing keeping her tethered. She was 6 months into her re-preparation when she received the first message. She almost didn't open it. It came from an unknown number, through her professional contact email, the one she used for work applications and industry correspondence. The subject line read, regarding the morning of, the date of the accident. She sat with it unopened for 2 days. She had received messages before, from the community forum post, mostly kind, a few strange. She had learned to be cautious. But something about the directness of the subject line, its specificity, made her uneasy in a way that felt different from caution. It felt like standing on the edge of something. She opened it. Dear Ms. Chen, I have been attempting to identify and reach you for several months. I believe you assisted me following a road accident on date. I would very much like to speak with you, at your convenience and complete comfort. There is no obligation and I intend nothing alarming. I owe you a conversation, at the very least. Please consider it. James Wren. She read it 3 times. Then she closed her laptop and went to the kitchen and stood at the sink for a long time, looking out the window at the building opposite, where a light was on in a second-floor window and someone was moving around behind it doing something completely ordinary. James Wren. She typed the name into a search engine that evening, tentatively, as if she were knocking on a door she wasn't sure she should knock on. The result stopped her breath. James Wren was not nobody. James Wren was, in the precise field she had spent 5 years training to enter, a significant and widely respected figure. He sat on the examination board of the institution that administered her qualification exam. He was a founding partner of one of the city's most established investment advisory firms. He had been a guest lecturer at 3 major universities. He had, according to a profile from 2 years prior, been described by an industry publication as one of the most quietly influential figures in financial certification of the last 2 decades. She sat with this information for a long time. She didn't know what to do with it. Part of her, the suspicious, tired, realistic part, immediately started constructing explanations that made it smaller and safer. Coincidence. Professional courtesy. Maybe he simply felt obligated. Maybe it meant nothing significant. But another part of her, the part that had knelt in the road for 11 minutes and pressed her jacket against a stranger's wound and said, "I've got you, I'm not going anywhere," that part knew that you don't search for someone for 4 months if it means nothing. She replied, "Mr. Wren, thank you for reaching out. I am open to speaking. Ella Chen." His response came within the hour. "Thank you. Would you be willing to meet in person? I find some conversations need to be had in the same room." She agreed to a meeting. She almost canceled it 4 times in the week that followed. She told Grace about it the evening before she was scheduled to go. She'd been putting it off, partly because she didn't know what to say, and partly because she wasn't sure what she was hoping for, or whether she should be hoping for anything at all. Grace listened to the whole story, the message, the search, who James Wren was, without changing her expression. When Ella finished, Grace was quiet for a moment. "Are you nervous?" Grace asked. "Terrified," Ella said. "Why?" Ella thought about it. "Because I don't want it to be something. I don't want to go in there hoping for something and come out with nothing. I think I'd rather have nothing and not have hoped." Grace looked at her for a long time. "That's not who you are, Ella," she said gently. "You have never been someone who hoped less in order to be hurt less. Don't start now." The office was in a quiet part of the financial district, one of those buildings that announces its importance through understatement rather than showiness. Clean lines, good materials, nothing loud. Ella arrived 8 minutes early and sat in the reception area, her back straight, her hands folded, her face as composed as she could manage. At exactly the appointment time, a door opened. James Wren was taller than she had imagined from the photographs. He was in his late 50s, lean, with the kind of stillness that belonged to people who had long since stopped needing to prove themselves in rooms. He walked toward her and extended his hand. "Miss Chen," he said. "Thank you for coming." She shook it. His grip was firm but not performative. "Thank you for finding me." He led her to a sitting area rather than a desk, armchairs, and a low table, more conversational than formal. He poured water. There was a moment of settling, of arranging. Then he said, "I want you to know that I remember everything from that morning." Something tightened in her chest. "Okay." I was not fully conscious, but I was aware. I heard your voice. I felt the pressure on the wound. He paused. I was aware that someone had stopped. She didn't say anything. "I didn't know who you were for a long time," he continued. "The forum post helped. A colleague showed it to me during my recovery. I asked my assistant to make inquiries. That took 4 months," she said. "You're careful about your privacy," he said, almost with approval. "It took time to confirm I had the right person." She looked at him steadily. "What is it that you want to say to me, Mr. Wren?" He looked at her with an expression she couldn't entirely read, not quite admiration, not quite respect, something more careful than either. "I know about the exam," he said. "I know you missed it because you stayed with me." The words landed differently than she'd expected. She had known he probably knew. But hearing it said directly, in his voice, in this quiet room, it shifted something. "I'm a member of the examining board," he continued. "I became aware of a candidate who had registered for the examination that morning and not appeared. A candidate who had been performing in the top 12% on practice assessments. When I connected that information to what I'd read about the woman on the road," he paused. "The pieces fit." Ella said nothing. She was watching him carefully. "I want to ask you something," he said. "And I want you to answer honestly, not diplomatically." "All right. If you had known, before you stopped, that the man on the road was a member of your examining board, that he had influence over the very certification you were going to miss the exam for, would it have changed your decision?" The question hit her hard. She hadn't expected it. She sat with it for a moment, not performing consideration, but actually considering. "No," she said. He waited. "I stopped because he was alone and bleeding and nobody else was moving," she said. "I didn't know who he was. I didn't stop because I expected anything from it. I stopped because," she paused, "because I could see him. And I've been taught that if you can see someone's pain, you don't just walk past it." James Wren was quiet for a long moment. "Would you make the same choice again?" he said, "knowing exactly what it cost you?" She held the silence for a moment. "Let it exist properly." "I don't know," she said finally. And then, more quietly, "But I couldn't have walked away. I know that much." He looked at her for a long time. Something in his expression shifted, not softened, exactly. More like it resolved. The way a photograph resolves when it finally comes into focus. "I'm not here to offer you something in exchange for what you did," he said carefully. "I want you to understand that clearly. What you did wasn't a transaction. And I will not make it one. I didn't come here expecting." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm saying it. Because you need to hear that first." He leaned forward slightly. "What I am here to tell you is this. There is a professional development program, competitive, rigorous, limited to 12 candidates per cycle, that is run jointly by my firm and 2 industry partners. It is designed for candidates who have demonstrated exceptional commitment to the field. It does not replace your qualification exam. You will still need to pass it, and no one will give you that. But it provides mentorship, resources, and placement opportunities that candidates rarely have access to independently." He paused. "I have nominated you for consideration." The room was very quiet. "That nomination was reviewed by a panel that does not know your story. They reviewed your professional record and your assessment history. They approved the nomination on merit." Ella looked at him. On merit. On merit, he said firmly. Your scores speak for themselves. I gave them a name. The record did the rest. She was quiet for a long moment. I don't know what to say, she said. You don't need to say anything, he replied. Except whether you're willing to be considered. She thought about the bench outside Hall C, where she'd sat for 45 minutes holding herself together. She thought about Grace at the kitchen sink, turning around to go back to the woman who was crying. She thought about the 11 minutes on the road, the jacket pressed to the wound, the glassy eyes finding her face. Yes, she said. I'm willing. 3 months later, Ella sat down to retake her qualification exam. The program had not handed her anything. It had been rigorous, demanding, and precisely as unforgiving as James Wren had described. She had worked harder in those 3 months than she had in any comparable period of her life. She had been mentored by people who expected excellence as a baseline and treated anything less as a conversation worth having. She had been challenged in ways that had exposed gaps she didn't know she had and then methodically filled them. She had also, for the first time, begun to understand that what she had done on the road that morning, the act of stopping, of seeing someone and not looking away, was not a detour from who she was becoming. It was the truest expression of it. The certification, the career, the financial stability, those things mattered. But the reason they mattered was because of the kind of person she wanted to build them with. And that person had been on the road that morning, kneeling in the fog, choosing without calculation. The exam room was quiet when she sat down. She looked at the first question. She began. She passed. Not narrowly. Not squeaking through. She passed with a score that placed her in the top 8% of candidates globally that cycle. She found out on a Tuesday morning, through an email notification, sitting at her kitchen table with coffee going cold beside her. She read the result twice. Then she put her phone face down on the table, pressed both hands flat against the wood, and breathed. Then she called her mother. Grace answered on the second ring. Mom, Ella said. And something in her voice, just the single word, just the tone of it, was enough. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, and then a sound Ella had only heard her mother make twice before in her life. A sound of pure, uncomplicated joy. I knew it, Grace said. Voice thick. I knew it. I always knew it. I know you did, Ella said. My girl, Grace said. Just that. My girl. They stayed on the phone for a long time after that, not talking much, just present in the shared silence of something that had finally arrived after a very long journey. The kind of silence that only exists between people who have been through something real together and don't need to fill it with words. Later that week, Ella sent a single message to James Wren. I passed. Thank you, not for any door you opened, but for asking me the right question. His reply came the next morning. The question only mattered because you answered it honestly. Congratulations, Miss Chen. The field is better for having you in it. She printed the message. She put it in the back of one of her notebooks, behind the color-coded notes and the practice papers and the residue of 5 years of effort. Not as a trophy. Not as proof. Just as a reminder. Because this is the thing that Ella learned, not in a classroom or a textbook or an examination hall, but on a foggy road in the early morning, kneeling beside a stranger with her jacket pressed to a wound she hadn't caused and couldn't fully fix. Sometimes the most important choices you make are the ones that cost you something real. Sometimes the version of yourself that shows up when there's nothing to gain and everything to lose, that version is the truest one. The one that the rest of your life should be built on. Sometimes the world doesn't reward you immediately. Sometimes it doesn't reward you at all. But if you live with enough integrity, and you keep showing up, for the people around you and for the values inside you, you find, eventually, that the life you're building has a foundation that can bear real weight. And that, in the end, is worth more than any qualification. Not every loss is a failure. Some losses are quiet investments in the kind of person you are choosing to become. And some mornings, when the fog is low and the city is still asleep and the choice is yours alone to make, those are the mornings that define you. What would you have done? If you had been standing on that road, exam slip in your pocket, 5 years on the line, a stranger bleeding on the ground, what choice would you have made? There is no wrong answer. But there is an honest one. And somewhere inside you, right now, you already know what it is. Drop it in the comments. We genuinely want to know. And while you're there, if this story moved you, if it made you feel something, please give this video a like, because it helps more people find stories like this one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is the moment. Click that subscribe button right now, because every week we bring you stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Stories about real choices, real costs, real people, and what it means to live with integrity in a world that doesn't always make it easy. And if you think Ella's story was remarkable, wait until you hear about the man who heard a cry for help on a deserted road, kept driving, and spent the next 20 years trying to outrun what that decision made him. That story is coming next. You do not want to miss it. Stay close. We'll see you there.